Hi, I'm Margot Adams Larson, Inspiration Entrepreneur. Welcome to the Inspired Hive Podcast, where we're creating a community of business and leadership professionals through meaningful conversations designed to inspire one another. Let's see what's in store. Sara Smucker-Barnwell is a clinical psychologist with 20 years of experience supporting change through behavioral science. She is the director of several large enterprises, a trusted advisor to C-suite executives, and a founder and managing partner of Seattle's largest independent practice business incubator. Sara is an investor, advisor, board member, and mentor to startups. She's a national speaker on business development in healthcare and has numerous published articles and book chapters in behavioral health, technology, and implementation science. I am just so grateful that you could join me and hop on to the Inspired Hive podcast, Sara. You are such an inspiration to me. So thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me, Margot. I've just, you and I have enjoyed a long time of being colleagues and friends, and I have just consistently, I feel like, been elevated and inspired by our collaboration. So I'm excited to be here today.
I could not think of somebody more inspiring to have on this chat than my chat buddy friend from telepsychology and telehealth world and our telehealth chats. And I just thought, how amazing would it be for us to spend a little time digging into your story more of what you have going on now.
So I'm Sara Smucker-Barnwell. I am a clinical psychologist by training, and have spent a lot of my career that's been really fortunate and fun, dedicated to, I would say, the intersection of evidence-based behavioral health and diverse practical applications. So a lot of my career, as you know, was spent in ethical telehealth, and I've worked in academic settings and corporate settings and clinical settings, or you name it, anywhere where ethical telehealth was happening and being developed. I wanted to be in the room where it happens. And in recent years have been making some transition to doing work that was more applied psychology, consulting psychology. So it was in this context I got to know you and some of our policy work related to telehealth. And as you say, we do our telehealth community chats together, which I think a lot of the inception of that was we just like talking about telehealth. And so let's make something out of that.
Well, and we've done a good job of that, I feel. It's been amazing to me to just see the uptake of that in terms of our more global telehealth community, and especially in the last several years, how many of our colleagues have pivoted and really become a whole lot more interested in hearing conversations about it, but also participating and having an ethical thought process in terms of what they do and how they roll out their practice. So
Absolutely. We always wanted to help democratize, but maybe not through a scary pandemic.
exactly. Well, I'd love to hear more about what you have going on right now, what you're excited about, and some of the new things that you have been jumping into.
Sure. Well, I think, at its core, the thing I'm always really interested in is what is innovative, what's interesting, what's, elevating our profession as psychologists, and what works, what's practical, what makes sense. And I think for my own practice, in the last probably 5 years or so, I found, then this was particularly in the context of the pandemic and after the pandemic, more and more I was talking to clients about work. And at other times, more around themes of dynamics of teams, of organizational values, of how they felt they fit in within that context. And for me, there was a real wake-up call towards this whole other area of psychology that at that time sort of knew about, but I didn't know much about. So I really
Mhm.
set forth, as you know, kind of on a program to increase my own competencies. But I feel like it helped me gain the confidence and the appetite to make some change in my work world. And so have been working more with organizations and individuals around themes of consulting on team dynamics and alignment of professional values with what happens in a larger team context and how that links up to sort of organizational value. This fall in particular, we're doing some work around constructive conflict, helping individuals and teams find their voice to communicate dissent when we need to in a way that is still psychologically safe, clear, and kind. So it's been really exciting work. I've really, really enjoyed it. The behaviorist in me, loves creating sort of iterative experiments to see, how we can help move culture along in ways that help facilitate better communications, have teams functioning better, and just have people having fun at work. So we spend a lot of time there.
It's so interesting in the conversations that I've been having, and part of the Inspired Hive podcast is really about blending together these conversations of entrepreneurship, business, leadership, and the development of how, as humans, we grow into these roles. And the words that you use are the work setting, which I would say, there's a component of business in that we don't always think about when we're the human in that role. And then there's also the organizational side where, in essence, it's a leadership structure of some type. And it's so interesting to me how we find ourselves kind of navigating or moving into those fields as we're moving along in our experience, in our profession, in our career development.
I agree. I think some of that maybe is born, I know at least my own case, of my own professional trajectory, right? I think especially as I had opportunities to work in larger organizations and corporate environments to kind of branch out and push some of the work I was doing. This is initially in the context of telehealth, working with corporate entities that wanted to design and implement telehealth systems. The silly joke I say is that, the job I was hired to do, designing and implementing telehealth systems, was not always the job I ended up doing, which might have been facilitating good communication, within a team, or
Right.
saying, okay, let's slow down and really think like, what's everyone trying to say here? And, how does that align with the project mission? And, so I think it opened my eyes like, oh, there's this whole other area where my skill set is
Mhm.
applicable and valuable. How do I do that in a way that is boundaried, ethical, and thoughtful and bring value, really bring value to organizations and to the individuals within them. But I think a lot of it's a reflection of kind of where the rooms I ended up sitting in and just saying like, oh, I can see there's this whole other facet that wasn't necessarily what I came here for, but it ended up being the thing I was excited to do.
And it's interesting because there's some common themes, no matter who is in that room, but there is that common theme of communication, of something missing maybe from the picture that as you're coming in as the outside person, you can very much see, but the internal folk have missed that. And I think the other piece that I've experienced in my journey, and I know we've talked about this a bit, is very often our professional programs, our professional training ground has not prepared us for some of the aspects of what we end up doing. Business is a whole side of that, but technology has come along. We don't have a lot of training in that, and
Yeah.
yet it's something we all interact with every single day as part of our professional and personal roles. And so having these thoughtful conversations and being able to elevate the team
Yeah.
into understanding what those concerns or challenges are from a real clinically thoughtful perspective is something that I've really admired from what you bring into the conversations and what you've brought into the practice of folks that you're working with.
Appreciate it. I think you highlight such an important point, which is that continuing education, it might be a broader scope than we initially understood. Because as you say, I'm a psychologist, I'm not a technologist. I'm a psychologist. I don't have an MBA. I think along the way, we certainly discover that, let's say, in my professional life, I've owned a private practice, and a group practice. And to do that, well, I had to learn how to do a profit and loss, sheet. I had to learn how to negotiate a commercial lease. There are themes that we didn't necessarily receive our training, in that sort of its nascency and its, initial phases, but that, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. Like, we will need that type of continuing education in a broader sense that we'll need to fill out our own competencies and really keep them in the forefront of our minds, and pursue those training opportunities that help us thrive in the spaces we want to show up in.
It's not just the professional aspect of it, it's the whole development, as you're describing, in terms of starting out into business and all of those other avenues of things that come along with it. And for many folks in private practice, we were just the one person who wanted to help another person, and we went to school and got that degree and whatever the field, right? But now we have this whole other thing. Like you said, there's numbers and dollar signs, and there's some other lease that we have to figure out, and it really takes on a whole world of its own that I think a lot of folks find stressful at times, frankly, in trying to navigate that along with their regular work.
Well, I think, Margot, you've done such a beautiful job. And I think you've been so unafraid at looking at and highlighting sort of the business aspects, of practice of the type of work we do and helping others make that leap. Because I think in some ways there's kind of a cultural thing that happens within mental health where it's almost, and I'm not speaking for everyone, just my own lived experience, it's almost like we're not supposed to think about that. We're not supposed to talk about that. It's almost if I'm serious about helping other people, if I'm serious about making a contribution, to science, if I'm serious about, being impactful to my community and the larger world, then I'm not going to be so worried about the dollars and cents of it. I'm not going to be so worried about, the business mechanics of it. And I think that that is such a disservice to practitioners because absent sort of those practical considerations, we're not necessarily taking the best care of ourselves. We're not positioning ourselves to be able to be as impactful, as helpful as we could be. And I really appreciate, I think you have done a beautiful job melding those themes, of talking about how that type of self-care, and it really is a type of self-care, is an investment, in showing up and being meaningful and being impactful in the spaces you want to be and being unafraid to kind of engage those conversations.
Well, thank you so much. I feel it really is that core. If we ignore those other aspects and just kind of wing it, or, like you said, don't pay as close attention to that, it ends up coming back to be our stress. It ends up coming back to, we haven't taken care of a financial aspect of our own being or a health aspect of our own being, that it makes it more challenging to show up for others after a while. It may not be like the first day, right? But year in and year out, that
Yeah.
really builds to being that challenge. And I think for my own journey, that's what I really discovered, and I'm passionate about sharing that with others. I'd love to hear a little bit about what inspires you.
I would say, and I even made notes because I knew that was a question you were going to ask me. So, I wanted to think about this a little bit because what inspires me is that intersectionality of
Mm,
the practical and the innovative. Like, where we harness something that is, that's pushing the boundaries, that's new, that's cool, that elevates us with something that just works, and I think that shows up in a lot of the spaces, where I've worked. I think, when a question you would ask me is like, who do I follow? And like, what inspires me? And I thought, well, this kind of shows up. I have like this very bimodal distribution of the information I consume. Like on one hand, I have these standard bearers for the profession. So, I look at the trust, I look at National Register, I look at American Psychological Association, American Telemedicine Association, the ones in our industry who are holding fast to psychological values, psychology's history, to not forgetting what we know from the past as
mhm.
we innovate and move forward. Um, I think then I have this other, space where I'm looking at a lot of Harvard Business Review. I'm looking at a lot of, some of these more implementation oriented spaces that are like, okay, but what works to get people to consume information? What works to help them to the next space? And so, for me, I think what inspires me is finding that sweet spot of like what helps really drive the goal forward, drive the project forward, that is ethical, that is risk managed, that is thoughtful, but at the end of the day works, and it's practical. And I think for me that has aligned really nicely with moving more into the consulting space, which has been more the themes of like, what do we know about human beings and how they work together, how they make meaning, and how they find their best selves. And then how do we make it actually work and not make it this onerous task? How do we make work fun and like pleasurable again, in this way that not everything feels like a chore and another box to check.
I just love that so much because I feel those themes of the innovation, of dreaming, of imagining, of kind of thinking through those like optimal potentials, and then also pairing that with things that will help us get there
Yeah,
that
exactly.
have been tried and we know work and that are maybe parts of that foundation that can move us forward towards that
I love
ultimate
that.
goal of where we want to go. I love chatting with you so much because you're so grounded with the psychology profession, but also with the innovation of growth and movement and kind of change in that regard. And it's just so fun to think about the different concepts, the way they shape across different form fields.
Well, right back at you. I think it's so important to keep a foot in both worlds, right? Like,
Mhm.
absolutely, I want to know about every cool AI innovation, in the space and like everything it can offer us. I want to learn about, what's next for our profession and how we can be leveraging these tools to do more and to be scalable and to be bringing greater impact. And I don't want to lose my touchstone, right? Like I don't want to
Mhm.
lose touch with what matters, why we're doing this, like what do I know from prior innovation are the things I need to look out for? How do I find that balance and thread that needle, being a standard bearer, but also being innovative? And if we can
Yes.
find that space, that balance, I think we serve ourselves and when we serve our clients in the best way possible.
What has been one of your biggest lessons, maybe something that you've been blessed with or had challenge with, but see as that big lesson in terms of your growth and trajectory?
I guess perseverance, I think around 2019, I remember being like, gosh, am I really going to do any more telehealth stuff? I don't know. Maybe people are over it. Like, I wouldn't recommend those circumstances under which, it became, the hot thing. But I think, and I don't mean perseverance in like being unafraid to pivot. I guess I mean to say iteratively experimenting, making mistakes, learning what we learn, getting it wrong sometimes, and oh, okay, and taking what we can. Like I think one of the things that when I say I've had this like fortunate and fun career, I really mean it because I've worked in all kinds of spaces. I've worked in VA hospitals, I've worked in, internet startups, I've worked in large established healthcare corporations, and small consultancies. And I think in all of these circumstances, there was a tie that binds thematically that brought me to that space. But boy, a lot of the times I would step into things and be like, oh, uh-oh, I'm not as familiar with this space as I was with the last one I just left. And there was a lot of iteration. There were a lot of things that, I did the wrong thing to learn how to do the right thing. And,
Mm.
it's never fun, those experiences, but really in that sort of Carol Dweck mindset-y sort of way, I think that ability to persevere and that sticking with it really helped me, I think, round out my skills in a way that I feel better equipped these days to take on a diversity of projects. I'm like, okay, well, gosh, I've had a little bit of experience here and there. And in each of these instances, maybe not making me an expert, any of them, as much as the willingness and the ability to step into something new, to experience that discomfort, to
Mhm.
tolerate that and to iterate and learn what I need to learn to do my work well. So I think that's probably been like a challenge, but also a tremendous gift to have the opportunity to do that.
I really love that. Not being afraid to make a mistake in order to be able to think of it and learn from it in terms of that growth is such an important role in no matter what profession we're
Yeah.
practicing or what avenue we're thinking about, even in our personal lives, that being okay to know that we can be okay even if we make a mistake or have a
Yeah.
failure or that's where the growth happens, really.
And I think, this is so much what we work with clients on, at least in the consulting space. It's like the expertise that got me here may not be the thing that gets me there.
Oh, I love
And
that.
like I may need to step out of my expertise. Certainly it's good that I have it. I want to hold fast to it in many ways, but if I'm going to learn the next thing, I'm probably going to have to embody a lot of openness, a lot of curiosity, and try to find as much as I can that like beginner's mind. And I think this theme, by the way, this is kind of the draw my beat all the time, as you know from knowing me personally, this is really intersectional with themes of gender for me, at least. Like, I think as a woman, there's a lot of moments where I feel like people may not assume I'm an expert, where I maybe feel a real strong temptation, to beat them up a little bit and say, well, I really know my stuff. And here's 3 citations why, and da, 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 and I've come over prepared to tell you that I'm the best or at least good enough, and I think that's such an interesting thing to hold because I didn't make up sexism, I didn't make up workplace discrimination. So I'm not, incorrect. They say now that we should say imposter phenomenon, not imposter syndrome, because
Mm.
women are perceiving something real. It's also true that I'm going to need to step away from those behaviors, from that holding so
Mhm.
fast to that if I really want to learn. And so it's such I think a balance. And I think for women in particular, there's kind of an extra layer here to be negotiated around like what it is to contend with, to contend with stereotype and things like that.
I I love that message of we have to think about who we need to become
Yeah.
to get to that next level. And it really is about stepping into that sometimes. And that means out of other things that we practiced or held
Yep.
strong to in order to kind of press that limit or comfort zone to move to that next level.
I step in
Um,
it all the time, so no problem.
well, brag on yourself. What is next that you're excited to be doing?
Well, the thing I'm really excited about right now is I am sort of debuting to limited markets a workshop called Constructive Conflict. And a thing I really encounter across diverse environments I work in, and this has been something that just resonates so much for me as a person, is it's hard to disagree. I'm a
Mm,
Midwesterner and I'm like terminally polite. I think on my way out from this mortal coil, I'll say like, "Oh, excuse me," like, and when I encounter these teams filled with just bright, thoughtful, engaged, hardworking people, I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of folks who are just lovely interpersonally. They really care about their teams, they care about their work, and they are reluctant, I think, at times to opine with clarity and the needed sort of directness because they don't want to hurt someone's feelings, because they would never want to be perceived as diminishing another's perspective. So finding a path to how do I communicate with my colleagues with clarity, directly, and in a way that still preserves psychological safety on a team. So that's something I'm really excited about right now, working with some small groups on. And I think, yeah, I'm going to spend the year kind of working on that theme, and I'm excited to do it.
I love this idea of focusing it on conversation and communication. And that really ties back to what you shared earlier in terms of some of the challenges that a lot of teams have is not necessarily what their organization is focused on, but how they're talking about it and how they're communicating.
And it's like all those lovely qualities that make them such great people, can can show up in other ways too, can get in the way sometimes, and so how do we not throw the baby out with the bathwater? Keep all that good intention, and bring in that type of clear, direct, concise communication that's needed.
Well, is there a piece of advice that you'd love to leave the listeners with? Maybe something someone shared with you, or maybe something you learned along the way?
Gosh, I mean, I would say try something different, try something new. I think right now we're in this really amazing moment where technology and the policies that support it are moving really quickly, and your voice is needed. We need folks who care. We need folks who are invested in innovation with ethics, in yes, advancing the profession, but also maintaining a hand on what does good in the world. So I think the more folks are involved in those types of conversations, and the more folks from the background that is interested and educated around ethics and risk management and how to find that balance with innovation, with standards, the better the outcome will be.
Wow, I love that. I always try and search for a quote to kind of end on, and I hadn't found a great one until you just talked about your piece of advice. And I don't know who I should cite in terms of this quote, but I reference it quite a bit, and it is highly relatable to technology, but also to lots of things in life. And that is, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And I think this really sums up some of the aspects of what you're talking about in terms of the thoughtfulness behind what we have available to us in technology, in practice, and knowing how to use it for good and making sure that we're focused on doing just that. Hey, thanks for spending time with us on the Inspired Hive podcast today. Don't forget to follow us on social media at Inspired Hive Podcast and make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss out on what's coming up next. Can't wait to have you back, and as always, live inspired.